The end of April won't arrive with chaos. It won't overwhelm or confront. That would be too obvious. Instead, it will feel like relief, smooth, quiet, coherent. The kind of ease that slips beneath your guard and asks nothing of you, except agreement. And that's where the danger begins. Because what's coming isn't confusion. It's comfort built from old blueprints. It's outdated alignment dressed in calm. You won't be pushed. You'll be welcomed. Invited to return to the version of yourself that knows how to fit in, how to explain away the ache, how to stay small and call it centered. And if you're not anchored, truly anchored, you might mistake the absence of conflict for truth. This isn't the lie you've battled. This is the one you never questioned. The one that sounds like logic. Feels like stability. Whispers like wisdom. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because when illusion wants to survive, it doesn't shout. It reassures. You'll be tempted to interpret this as alignment. As clarity. As peace. But real peace doesn't dull your instincts. It sharpens them. So if something inside you goes quiet in the wrong way, not from rest, but retreat, listen closer. What looks smooth may only be familiar. And what feels like return may be regression. The test won't come through pressure. It will come through ease. Be ready. There's a moment when clarity returns, not as revelation, but as structure. Mercury shifts, and thoughts begin lining up again. The mind stabilizes. Words come easier. Decisions that once felt slippery begin to hold their shape. You feel organized. You feel sure. But beneath that confidence is a strange quiet, like the voice you're hearing isn't entirely your own. Because while logic may return, truth does not always arrive with it. What you're thinking now feels polished. Familiar. Almost practiced. You're not confused, but you're not free either. The flow is back, yes. But the flow feels like something rehearsed. Like an echo from a self you once were, speaking lines that once kept you safe. Not because they were true, but because they helped you survive. And that's the moment to pause. Because what feels like alignment might just be memory. What sounds like certainty might just be a well-trained script. You're not being lied to. But you might be mistaking old conclusions for current direction. These thoughts don't carry deception. They carry dust. They come from the version of you who knew how to sound composed under pressure. Who knew how to intellectualize emotion. Who knew how to build the illusion of forward movement by stacking logic on top of a body that was still holding fear. They have the appearance of wisdom. But they lack its spirit. They sound right, but they don't resonate. They calm your mind, but they don't open your chest. They organize your schedule, but they don't free your soul. That's the warning. That's the fracture. Because what's returning now isn't false. It's outdated. And the most seductive lies are the ones that feel like home. You may find yourself narrating again. Making sense of things. Explaining your path. Justifying your feelings. Declaring your certainty. But what if the mind's return isn't guidance, it's reflex? What if this clarity is the mind's way of regaining control over a process the soul never meant to be managed? This isn't the voice of deception. It's the voice of habit. And habit can speak with great confidence. Especially when it wears the mask of logic. But the truth doesn't always speak in full sentences. The soul doesn't argue its case. The deeper knowing rarely arrives with structure. It arrives with weight. With stillness. With a sense that something has landed, not because it made sense, but because it made contact. So what's being offered to you right now through Mercury's shift is not wrong. But it's not final. It's the return of language, of definition, of decisions. And those things are beautiful. But they are not your compass, not yet. Let your thoughts return. Let your mind stabilize. But don't confuse the presence of structure with the presence of truth. What feels good to think isn't always good to follow. And what feels clear isn't always coming from where you are now, it may be coming from who you used to be. So listen carefully. Where are these thoughts really coming from? Do they rise from the present moment? Or are they stitched from patterns that once worked but no longer fit the body you're becoming? This is a time for deep discernment, not between true and false, but between true and familiar. That's where the trap lives. That's where the test is. You're not being asked to reject logic. You're being asked to hold it lightly. To let it speak, but not let it dictate. To recognize when the clarity you feel is rooted in growth, and when it's rooted in performance. If your thoughts today feel too easy, too convenient, too rehearsed, pause. That's not intuition. That's the script resurfacing. And the danger isn't that it's wrong. The danger is that it's close enough to right that you won't stop to ask if it's still true. The return of logic is not always the return of truth. One can build a beautiful sentence. The other can burn it down. Let yourself think. But don't rush to believe. Not everything that settles your nerves is here to guide your path. Some of it is just echo. Some of it is old armor trying to reassemble itself now that you've made it through the fire. And if you stay long enough in that awareness, the real voice will come. Quiet. Undramatic. Incomplete. But yours. And maybe that voice won't be confident. Maybe it won't know what to do next. Maybe it'll stutter. But it'll be real. And real is enough. You'll notice it not because it sounds certain, but because it feels honest. It may not have the right words yet, but it won't avoid the hard ones. It won't dance around discomfort. It won't offer easy peace. It will offer direction that lives in your bones even if it doesn't yet make sense in your mind. Trust that voice. Even if it's faint. Because while Mercury brings back the rhythm, only your soul carries the melody. And this chapter you're walking into, it's not about getting the words right. It's about living in a frequency that can't be faked anymore. Let logic return. Let structure hold you loosely. But listen for what trembles beneath it. That's where the truth is waiting. And it doesn't need to be clever. It just needs to be yours. It doesn't begin with a craving. It begins with a flicker. Something passes through your field, a person, a thought, a memory, a moment, and for a split second, it feels easier than where you are now. You don't even call it temptation. You just call it familiar. And suddenly, something old starts looking new. The person who once drained you feels softer. The place you once escaped feels magnetic. The dynamic you fought so hard to unlearn starts speaking in the language of growth. And you think, maybe this time, it's different. That's how emotional memory returns. Not loud. Not painful. Just slightly more reasonable than it used to be. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Because you've done the work. You've cried, fasted, healed, learned. You've declared things complete. You've cut cords. You've walked away. But the thing about emotional memory is that it doesn't always come back to haunt you. Sometimes it comes back to seduce you. With timing. With grace. With upgraded vocabulary. And when it does, the test isn't whether you recognize it. It's whether you hesitate when your system already said no. There's no trauma response now. No spiral. Just a subtle confusion. A little static in your clarity. You can still say all the right things, but something in your energy begins to lean backward. Not obviously. Not recklessly. But just enough for the past to feel like a possibility again. And then it begins, the invitations. A message from someone you buried in forgiveness. A career option you swore you'd never consider again. A role you outgrew, now presented as spiritual service. These are not mistakes. They are mirrors. And your nervous system knows it before your mind catches up. Because it's not about the person, or the offer, or the timing. It's about who you used to be when that thing had a hold on you. And even though you've moved forward, there's a part of you that remembers how to shrink into that shape. How to bend your truth to keep the peace. How to speak softly enough that the past doesn't feel threatened. How to rationalize your intuition until it stops screaming. But it doesn't scream now. It just goes quiet. That's how you know this is a real test. Not the ones that feel obvious, but the ones that require you to trust what's no longer yelling. The yes that never made it to your mouth, but was already living in your breath. The resistance you felt in your gut before your mind wrote its script. The dream you forgot, but still woke up carrying. Your body already answered. But your conditioning wants a second opinion. So now you find yourself questioning what you already know. Making room for something you already released. Romanticizing what you already resolved. And it feels spiritual. Mature. Kind. Because now you're not reacting, you're considering. You're reflecting. You're opening. And yet, the more you open, the less you feel like yourself. That's the moment you should stop. Because the question isn't whether the past changed. The question is whether you trust yourself not to. Just because something looks more polished now doesn't mean it won't cut the same way. Just because the voice sounds softer doesn't mean the cycle won't spin again. Just because it calls itself clarity doesn't mean it's not longing in disguise. And just because you could handle it now doesn't mean you're supposed to. Growth doesn't mean returning with stronger boundaries. Sometimes growth means refusing to re-enter at all. Even when it seems safe. Even when it sounds healed. Even when the voice in your head says, maybe this is the restoration. Because not every return is redemption. Sometimes it's a loop wearing a cleaner face. You're not being tempted by chaos anymore. You're being tempted by coherence. The past has learned how to dress itself in timing. And now, the memory doesn't come back to punish you, it comes back to see if it still has permission. And you feel it. In the stillness. In the breath you hold for too long. In the moment your yes takes half a second too long to arrive. This isn't confusion. It's resistance. But not against the past, against the possibility of betraying yourself again. And then the ancient part of you remembers, do not look back, lest you turn into salt. Not because looking back is weak. But because fixation can fossilize. You don't get frozen because you made a mistake. You get frozen because you knew it wasn't right and moved anyway. Because you talked yourself into a circle and called it discernment. Because you knew the timing was wrong, but the story was too beautiful to interrupt. And this time, you're not going to do that. This time, you're going to believe the part of you that doesn't feel awe or fear, just a quiet no. Because the test isn't about reaction. It's about recalibration. Can you feel the offer rising and stay centered? Can you feel the memory hovering and not reach for it? Can you be invited and not bend just to feel needed again? This isn't a battle. It's a checkpoint. This isn't punishment. It's proof. That you can stand in front of what once made you small, and not flinch. That you can feel the pull, and not follow it. That you can recognize the feeling, and still refuse to inhabit it. Because you didn't come this far just to prove you could survive what you've already healed. You came this far to finally stop building altars to what your soul already outgrew. So let it come. Let it echo. Let it shimmer just long enough for you to recognize that it no longer lives here. That it doesn't fit in your body. That it doesn't speak your language. That even though the past has returned, you didn't. And you won't. Because what's behind you no longer needs closure. It needs release. Quiet, grounded, unapologetic release. The kind that doesn't demand a monologue or a meltdown, just a quiet step forward into a life that doesn't ask you to reconsider what you already buried. And if it knocks again, you won't answer it. Not because you're angry. Not because you're afraid. But because this time, You don't even hear it. Beauty begins to shift. Not because the object has changed, but because your eyes no longer filter it the same way. What once shimmered with grace now looks theatrical. What once gave comfort now feels overdone. Too smooth. Too precise. You notice the choreography, the layers of polish. And instead of feeling enchanted, you feel tired. That's how it begins, Venus revealing not what you love, but what you're still pretending to. When Venus reaches her brightest, she no longer soothes. She illuminates. And this light isn't soft. It's surgical. She doesn't cast a dreamy glow. She turns up the mirror and asks whether you can stand to see the whole reflection, especially the parts you've trained yourself to ignore. You used to call it beautiful. Now it feels performative. Not because it's changed, but because you've outgrown your willingness to keep nodding at the parts of it that never truly resonated. The carefully arranged life. The curated version of love. The goal that once lit you up but now feels hollow no matter how well you frame it. Venus doesn't break it. She simply removes the filters. And the result isn't chaos, it's clarity too sharp to dress in aesthetics. The discomfort comes when you realize the beauty isn't false, it's just no longer meant for you. That's the real tension, standing in front of something technically admirable, emotionally clean, even socially praised, and still knowing, deep in your spirit, that it's no longer true for you. That you've been tolerating it, calling it alignment, masking your dissonance with language like gratitude and grace. You've been convincing yourself it's enough. But now the light has shifted. And so has your ability to pretend. Venus at her brightest becomes a mirror too sharp to lie in. Not because the surface is broken, but because you're no longer willing to fit inside the frame. You feel it in relationships that suddenly feel more like rituals than connections. In work that delivers what it promised, but none of what you long for. In habits that polish your image but don't feed your soul. You kept them out of respect. For the path. For the effort. For the history. But now the image is still and your body is restless. That's how you know. This isn't a breakdown. It's a soft refusal. You're not angry. You're just not aligned. You're not dramatic. You're just done pretending. And here's where the deeper question begins to emerge, not, what do I still love, but, what am I still tolerating because I once called it love? Because the truth is, you haven't been clinging to the thing. You've been clinging to your memory of why you chose it. To the version of yourself who said, this is enough. To the way your eyes softened when you first saw it. To the story you built around it. That's what's hard to let go of, the meaning, not the object. And now Venus holds it in the light, not to shame it, but to ask you whether you still want to carry what no longer reflects who you are. The Hermetic warning echoes quietly here, that which is above reflects that which is below, distorted by desire. You're not seeing lies. You're seeing your projection. And the distortion isn't in the mirror. It's in what your wanting once needed to believe was real. What are you still desiring that your truth already released? That's the hard question. Because desire is sticky. It doesn't dissolve just because the soul grows. It lingers, hoping for one more glimpse, one more excuse, one more cycle. And as long as you're willing to tolerate the gap between what you know and what you want, it will keep finding ways to reflect itself back to you, in people, in praise, in aesthetics that almost fit but never quite hold. Venus doesn't punish. She clarifies. She doesn't destroy the illusion. She lets you see how long you've been editing your perception just to stay comfortable. How long you've been rearranging yourself to fit into something that no longer speaks your language. How long you've been calling it beautiful because it's what everyone else celebrates, even though your spirit has been silent in the presence of it for weeks, months, maybe longer. This is when the choice becomes visible. Not a dramatic choice. A subtle one. Will you keep calling it sacred because of how it looks? Or will you start listening to how your body feels when you're near it? Will you keep tolerating what once aligned just because it's easier than admitting you've outgrown the frame? Or will you let the distortion be enough? Let it signal the quiet truth, that what once mirrored you now magnifies your discomfort. That what once inspired you now exhausts you. That what once held your identity now limits your freedom. This isn't a crisis. It's a reorientation. Venus isn't asking you to burn it down. She's asking if you're still willing to call it yours. And if you're not, then what? What would happen if you stopped adjusting to beauty that no longer includes you? If you stopped choosing harmony that excludes your wholeness? If you allowed something new to emerge, something less perfect, less proven, less praised, but more honest? That's where the mirror finally softens. Not when the image disappears, but when you stop trying to become what it reflects. You're not here to keep fitting. You're here to keep becoming. And some beauty was only meant to be admired from a distance. Not because it's false, but because you've stepped into a version of yourself that doesn't need it to feel real anymore. You wake up with a spark. A thought hits with perfect timing. It feels electric. Clear. As if the sky parted just for a moment and something landed straight into your nervous system. You feel inspired. Moved. Motivated. Like something clicked. Like this is the idea you've been waiting for. And then, nothing. It dissolves. You still remember it. You still write it down. Maybe even share it. But the energy that came with it, the urgency, the power, the clarity, fades fast. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because it didn't go deep. It stayed in the air, hovered in the mind, lit up your internal sky for a second, and vanished before it could anchor. That's what this week holds, awakenings that shimmer with brilliance but fail to build anything lasting. It's not that the insights are false. It's that they're untethered. They arrive like meteor flashes across the surface of your mind, bright, momentary, powerful, but they don't reach the root. They don't touch the part of you that actually shifts your actions, your choices, your embodiment. They hit the intellect. They stimulate. But they don't stay. And this is where the danger lies, not in misdirection, but in the illusion of movement. Because when something feels spiritually profound, we assume it's real. We trust the surge. We follow the high. And often, it's enough to carry us for a few hours, maybe a few days. But then we find ourselves back in the same loops. The same habits. The same distractions. Wondering how something that felt so alive now feels irrelevant. Paul once warned about messengers who appeared as light, but served misalignment. This is that energy. Not dark. Not malicious. Just deceptively bright. It wears the glow of wisdom. It speaks in beautiful symbols. It offers you visions and phrases and revelations that sound deep enough to post, but not strong enough to transform. These awakenings don't demand your obedience. They feed your image of yourself. And that's why they're tricky. Because they feel empowering. They flatter your sense of growth. They echo your values. But they never challenge your comfort. They never push you into the parts of yourself that resist real change. It's not enough to feel activated. That's not the same as being initiated. One lights you up for a moment. The other asks you to burn away something in exchange for truth. And this week, the air is thick with sparks but thin on fire. You may receive brilliant ideas. You may feel sudden purpose. You may even feel called. But before you declare a new direction, pause. Ask, did this root in me? Or did it just reverberate through my craving for meaning? Because sometimes the most spiritual sounding thought is just your ego in disguise. It wears white robes. Speaks in poetic cadence. Carries the illusion of depth. And yet, it's hollow. Not because it means nothing, but because you never brought it down far enough to change your foundation. These symbolic awakenings aren't evil. But they're not enough. You're not here to chase meaning that makes you feel safe. You're here to embody truths that dismantle the structures you built around avoidance. So be careful what you claim as divine this week. Be careful what you call truth. Don't mistake excitement for discernment. Don't confuse emotional resonance with spiritual instruction. And above all, don't substitute insight for action. If something lights you up but doesn't ask anything of you, hold it loosely. If a thought feels perfect but doesn't touch your core behaviors, let it pass. And if an idea flatters your identity but never disturbs your comfort, it may be brilliance, but it's not awakening. Real transformation rarely glows. It grinds. It stretches. It confronts. And most of all, it roots. Not in the high moment, but in the hours and days after, when no one's watching and no light is shining, and you choose differently, not because of inspiration, but because something in you has finally changed. Let the flashes come. Let the symbols speak. But before you call it truth, ask if it's willing to stay. Ask if it's willing to cost you something. Ask if it echoes not just in your mind, but in your breath, your actions, your silence. Because anything that only lives in the mind, no matter how bright, is still just an echo. And you weren't made to echo. You were made to embody. Sometimes, the most deceptive moments are the ones that feel gentle, familiar. We assume discomfort always signals danger, but comfort can be a disguise too. Especially when it mimics peace while slowly undoing progress. In seasons like this, when what once thrilled you returns again, don't just ask if it feels good, ask if it still fits the person you're becoming. The end of April doesn't come to pull you apart. It comes gently, handing you a version of life you once prayed for and asking if you still want it. It won't feel dramatic. It won't feel wrong. It might even feel peaceful, like something is finally returning to place. But that's the moment to be most alert. Because what's being offered isn't chaos. It's coherence, shaped by an older version of you. The mindset that once helped you survive now feels like stillness, but it's actually silence you had to force. And if you say yes, nothing will crash. But the fire inside you will begin to dim. Slowly. Quietly. Until weeks later, you wonder when your spirit stopped responding. This isn't about asking, is this wrong? The real question is this mine anymore? Check your breath. Listen to your body. And if you sense even the slightest disconnection, trust it. Because what returns now isn't false, it's unfinished. And that's what makes it powerful. And dangerous.